Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to EON Network Podcast. I really am somewhat excited to talk about this subject, and it's not because it's not interesting. In fact, this subject has interested me so many years, but it's a sad subject. It's loaded with controversy. It's loaded with grief. It's loaded with, as I said, sadness. I'm talking about September 11th of 2001 and how that event really shook the entire world. It didn't shake just the United States of America, but it actually shook the entire world. So I wanted to take the time to reflect on what happened 23 years ago. To give the rundown real quick, September 11th, 2001, that morning, 19 al-Qaeda operatives were able to they were able to hijack 4 commercial aircrafts. 2 of them crashed into the World Trade Center, 1 into the Pentagon, and 1, of course, was thwarted because of the heroes and the passengers of United 93. So United 93 crashed into a field in Pennsylvania, was supposedly going to hit either the Capitol or the White House, but again, the heroes of United 93 made sure that wasn't going to happen that morning. And you have to understand that morning, it was just over 100 minutes. I don't remember exactly. I think it's 128 to be exact. But nonetheless, literally, just a bit over 2 hours, the world changed. And everything really wasn't the same after 9/11. Now, I was just about 3 years old, so I don't remember anything concerning the subject itself, but I do remember growing up in the 9/11 decade, and I do remember watching the news on a daily basis. I remember watching the updates and what we were going to do as a country, what was happening. I was scared for my life because as a child, seeing these images of 9/11 through the years at school and also the computer and so forth, it scared me a ton because I said, this could happen anywhere. Some lunatic out there can actually do whatever they have in mind, and they can kill innocents. So, bottom line, though, after 9/11, things changed, obviously. The war of Afghanistan started back in, I think it was October 2001. They were in the hunt for Osama bin Laden, the man who was behind the 9/11 attacks. Now, a little fun fact that a lot of people don't really know. We almost got Osama bin Laden in December of 2001. It was the Battle of Tora Bora. So, right after 9/11, a few months after, we got the chance to locate where Osama bin Laden was. He was hiding in his safe haven in Tora Bora. And the United States of America tracked the guy, and they were going to go in there, and they were going to make sure they were going to try to capture or kill the guy. They were zoning in, but at the last second, though, they were told to step back and let the Afghani fighters take over from there. And the theory is that the Afghan fighters, deep down, really, respected Osama bin Laden and let him get away freely on purpose. So again, that's a theory, but it wouldn't surprise me because at the time, a lot of people did view Osama bin Laden as a very, very, he was a hero to a lot of people out there. So the Afghanistan fighters took our money. They shot a couple of bullets here and there, claiming that they're fighting against Al-Qaeda, but probably just did it for the sake of money, and they let Osama bin Laden free. But regardless of the theories, though, the fact is Osama bin Laden did indeed escape. So really the question is, what would have happened if we got Osama bin Laden in 2001? I mean, that would have been a huge turning point right then and there. But of course he escaped. He wasn't found until 2011. So through the years, we were in the war in Afghanistan. We went into Iraq for no reason, by the way, because the idea was that Saddam Hussein and Iraq apparently were connected in 9/11, and that Saddam Hussein was a man with weapons of mass destruction, although when they got the guy, they found none of that. So the war of Iraq was really just, there was no point to it, but nonetheless. So anyways, fast forward, and as I mentioned, May 1st, 2011, Osama bin Laden was killed, and then for the years, ISIS was formed, and then probably by 2019, 2020, ISIS really took a huge hit, and now we're here, 2024, and ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist networks aren't really the stronger, or rather the strongest anymore. So obviously, we're still fighting these terrorists. The CIA, the FBI, they're making sure that they're going to be hunting these guys down. But it's not necessarily more so a war. Of course, Joe Biden got the chance to pull out the United States, the troops out of Afghanistan back in 2021, claiming that, hey, we got the mission accomplished. Al-Qaeda's weakened. We already killed Osama bin Laden. I think it's time for us to pull out. So I want to talk about, because that was the history of 9/11, a brief one at that. And I want to just talk about how everyone was back then. Because everybody back then, literally everyone was on the same page that day. And I just thought it was absolutely wonderful to be watching these documentaries and watching how people reacted to each other. It did not matter it really did not matter if you were a person who was a Democrat, a person who was Republican, independent, didn't matter if you were black, didn't matter if you were white, didn't matter of your religion. Literally, it did not matter. Everyone came together at that moment. Really. And everybody was together. Everyone really respected each other more than ever before. Now, of course, strike that, though, because unfortunately, Islamophobia did rise, and a lot of people were against people who were Muslims, and a lot of the people who practiced the Islam religion were targets, unfortunately. So that was the awful part. But in an overall perspective, a lot of people were more so, it was much easier to be united than it was, than any other year, because something like this never happened before. I mean, an attack of this an attack of this magnitude never happened. Okay, you can talk about Pearl Harbor, and yes, that was in U.S. soil technically, but that was through the bases. That was kind of at the war bases. You know, you would kind of expect, if that makes sense, for an attack to happen, although, of course, that was an awful attack, too, and many innocents did die. But nonetheless, it was a war zone. But 9/11, it was just your everyday citizen just going to work, whether if it was the Pentagon or people who were heading onto the planes themselves or people who worked at the World Trade Center. They were just everyday citizens who had nothing to do with going to war with anyone. They were just there to work and make a living, and they got killed, obviously, because of that senseless act. What I'm trying to say here is this, though. Back then, it was just a different story. It was just much easier to stay united. It really was. Yeah, sure, there's some differences here, but mostly when it comes to at least the political side of things, people really understood that at the end of the day, it's not really about politics, but it's really about being together and really fighting for the country. Somewhere along the lines, however, that was lost, unfortunately. You look at the year 2024, and I think it's really safe to say that we are more divided than ever before, because so many people have so much animosity for their opposing political party, and I, for one, am honestly against all political violence, and I'm against anybody who's going to badmouth or physically or mentally abuse someone just because they're supporting whoever. But there are so many people out there nowadays that actually take the chance to do that. And you look at again, it's just a very sad thing, because you look at back then, 2001, and of course the surrounding years, and everybody was just it was a much different world back then. But now you look at 2024, and really the past couple of years, everyone's more hostile. Everyone is much more dedicated for their political affiliation, and they will absolutely do what they can to kind of just make the other opposing party feel bad about it. And I'm talking more about Joe Biden and Donald Trump, obviously, more so. And, of course, upcoming Kamala Harris. But I've seen a lot of Republicans and Democrats just completely scratch and claw each other, almost as if they're fighting as if they were dogs and cats. And, yeah, sure, I might be leaning towards Kamala Harris. And I might be leaning towards the Democrat Party, but that doesn't mean that I hate Republicans. That doesn't mean that I believe Republicans are all bad. I think Republicans out there, there's a lot of rude ones. I had the chance to talk to a lot of people who were Republicans, and they would be quite rude to me. But there were a very few Republicans here and there through the years that were very much respected, or respectful, rather. They were very much a person who was willing to hear what I had to say, and then they would listen to what I had to say, and vice versa. I would listen to them too. It was a really good conversation. I can remember some of the times that I spoke to someone who had a different view, and they were very respectful about it. But you rarely have that now, because I feel as ever since Donald Trump became president, it's almost as if it kind of opened the doors to go against people freely, that it was okay to really rise up against the opposing party and to make sure that, hey, we are the dominant ones and no one should ever oppose us. If you're a Democrat, then you're an idiot. And Donald Trump, of course, coined the term fake news, and then journalists who were covering for ABC and CNN, these journalists who were supposedly covering for the Democrat Party and going against the Republican Party, these journalists were tortured physically and mentally. So then you look at the Capitol attacks that happened in 2021, and you would never even guess, that would have never, honestly, I don't think anybody would have ever guessed that was going to happen back in 2001. Can you imagine if you told someone in 2001, hey, we just saw the worst terrorist attack in the nation's history. But I can guarantee you that sometime in 2021, we're going to be seeing our own people attack the Capitol. You look at them and go, you're crazy. Terrorists are capable of doing that. They're monsters. They're animals. They're going to instill fear in society. They're going to make sure that they can do that. But our own people? Not at all. We have respect for this country. We have respect for each other. Well, January 6, 2021, obviously our own people got the chance to raid the Capitol buildings. Or rather, the Capitol building itself. So you look back and you compare and contrast, and you really look back and go, wow, we were here September 11th, 2001, as bad as that day was, and it was awful. But as bad as that day was, you really look back and you can appreciate how everyone really stood together that day. And you ask yourself, are we like that at this moment in time? And unfortunately, the answer that I can give, coming from me, is that, hey, we're not like that anymore. We aren't. And that's sad to me, Now we're kind of living in fear. I mean, for example, I'm actually scared nowadays to tell people that I support the Democrat Party. It wasn't like that beforehand. It really wasn't. I would not be afraid to say that to someone who was a Republican many years ago, many moons ago, back in 2005, 6, 7, and so on. But something changed along the lines, as I said, and then it just became more hostile. And everybody would absolutely insult me and many others who really didn't do anything, but they would state that they were the, supporting either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And both parties, again, are just going after each other more than ever before. So, again, it's sad for me to talk about it, but it's true. September 11th, that was supposed to be a turning point. That was supposed to be us opening our eyes. It was a wake-up call. It was an unfortunate wake-up call, but it was a wake-up call. That was supposed to allow us to really respect each other more than ever before, for us to really understand that we as Americans are going to come together, and not just Americans, but just everyone else in the world. Didn't matter which country we're in. Just everyone being able to just respect everyone's background, to respect the person and what they believe in and their orientation, whatever the case may be. Just anyone who's a human being at the end of the day. It didn't matter if you live in the United States or not. That was supposed to be a reminder that all of us are humans at the end of the day, that at any moment in time, life can just go right before our very eyes. But again, as I said before, somewhere along the lines, we lost that somehow. It's very sad. It's very sad. Because again, the idea was after 9/11, we were going to come together. And at first, it did work. In fact, I think the night of 9/11, people of Congress, politicians and so forth came out together and they sang some songs commemorating the people who lost their lives. And it was absolutely incredible. You saw Republicans and Democrats just being together, being willing to be together at that moment in time, because obviously it didn't matter about your political party anymore. It just mattered about being humans, decent human beings who respected each other. But it's not like that anymore. I don't know how in the world it got to that point, but it got to that point. We're living in a world where we now hate each other for being different and having different beliefs. We're living in that world, and I am not comfortable because just it's a very uncomfortable life living, knowing that there's people out there that can kill you at any given time for having a different. I mean, there's been a lot of reports of people killing others just for having a different position. So it's scary. It's frightening. It really is. And I have to ask all of you guys who are watching this, I mean, how do you feel about the United States of America? I'm sure a lot of people out there might be feeling great about it, but you really have to put it in perspective. I implore all of you to look back how it was back in 2001, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And you can see that, yeah, sure, there was more debates and so forth. I'm not going to say that Republicans and Democrats were at the same page, or I should say were on the same page, but it wasn't as hostile. Look at George Bush and Senator Kerry. Look at the debate that took place back in 2004. You look back and you go, wow, I can't believe that you saw these two civil human beings opposing political parties, but they were willing to debate with each other with much respect. Obama and Mitt Romney as well. But then you look at any debate that Donald Trump, for instance, is in, and now it's turned into a very much shouting match, an insulting match, going around, coining fake things, this conspiracy, that conspiracy. And then now the public got the chance, the people who especially support Donald Trump, heard all that. And now they believe it. And because of that, they now have that new mindset that it's absolutely okay to degrade people, especially if you have a different viewpoint. So 23 years later, the people who passed away, the people who were killed that day, especially the people in the United 93, they were fighting. They were fighting against the terrorists, the firefighters, the policemen, the first responders, the strangers who took care of each other on that day. They would have wanted us to continue that just 23 years later. They literally would have wanted us to continue that through the years. And unfortunately, they're past, they're not here anymore. But the unfortunate truth is it's not like that. It's not like that anymore. And I don't know. It's a very saddening topic to me, because you look back and you just go that everyone at one point in time really was much nicer to each other. And then after many years, obviously now it's not like that, as I said before many times throughout the podcast. It's just, I can't believe it's gotten to that point. Sometimes I ask myself, how did it get to that point? And I'm not saying that Donald Trump was the main reason, but it's almost to say that Donald Trump was maybe one of the main factors. Back in 2016 especially, almost a decade ago, things really started changing for the worse. So, anyways, again, everyone, we reflect those who remember, we remember those who actually were affected on 9/11, just 23 years ago, the worst attack in the nation's history. Still sad to this day, 23 years after. And you got to watch the documentaries, people. If you watch the documentaries, you'll get the chance to really have a firsthand view, a firsthand count of what 9/11 was all about. Especially for the youngsters out there, for the people who are growing up in this decade, it would be very important for you to really understand how life was like during that day and during the surrounding years, because it's not the life you see now. And sometimes it would be very important for the youngsters who are growing up, who are becoming the next generation, for them to look back and understand their history so it doesn't repeat itself in the future. And that goes back to that quote, that very famous quote that says, for those who don't know history, they're doomed to repeat it. And it's true. So I feel as if these people who are out there, who are learning about things, they should truly understand what life was like back in 2001. And understand that it was very important for everyone to really, really be respectful to each other. It was important for us to understand that we can't take life for granted. And it's very important to understand that it doesn't matter who you are. At the end of the day, you were a human being. Didn't matter if you supported Democrats. Didn't matter if you supported Republicans. Didn't matter what it was. You were a human being. And that's what it was back then. Nowadays, it's not like that. Nonetheless, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and cut it short a little bit here. Again, we commemorate the lives who were lost back in September 11th of 2001. It was a very horrific day, and we remember all the lives that were lost, the firefighters, the policemen as well that got the chance to help out, those who were in the United 93, and all the victims, literally, all the victims who were just going to go to work that day or who were heading in a plane to reach their destination and see family members or whatever the case may be, all those innocent people who lost their lives. And of course, the victims, the people who were injured, and some of the victims to this day that are suffering with cancer, lung cancer, because of the air, of the dust that they were able to consume, and it affected their lungs in the long run. So it's a horrific day. We still feel the impacts to this day, unfortunately, but it's something that definitely is worth noting, and it's definitely something that's worth talking about. So thanks for joining us here tonight in this episode, everyone, and we will catch you next time. We'll catch you next time for the next episode. Goodbye, everyone.